My granddaughter was 9 years old and peeling a clementine on the back porch when she looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, Aunt Sandra was kissing Mr. Craig in the barn." She said it so calmly, like she was telling me a cloud had passed over the sun. Her tiny fingers kept pulling the rind in one long spiral, the way I had taught her to do it, and her eyes went right back to her work, as if the sentence had cost her nothing. But it cost me everything. Craig was my son-in-law. Sandra was my wife's sister. And that one quiet sentence, spoken by a child who did not fully understand what she had seen, was about to crack open a plan years in the making. A plan designed to take my land, hollow out my daughter's marriage, and use my loneliness against me like a key. Before I tell you how this ends, I want to ask you something in the comments. If a child told you something that terrible, would you confront everyone immediately, or would you stay silent and start gathering proof? Tell me below. Because the choice I made that afternoon is the reason my daughter still has her children, and the reason that land still belongs to this family. I did not move from that porch chair. I did not shout. I did not stand up. I did not look toward the barn. I only sat there and listened to the sparrows in the old hickory tree while my mind tried, and failed, to make the words into something smaller than they were. My name is Otis Calloway. I am 68 years old, a dairy farmer from central Pennsylvania who has spent most of his life trusting the rhythm of quiet mornings and honest work. The farm I tend is the same land my father bought in 1962. 460 acres of pasture, timber, creek beds, and Pennsylvania clay that smells like cold rain in October. I have buried calves in its soil and raised a daughter in its shadow and stood in its back fields in February, watching my breath disappear into the dark. I thought I understood what this land meant. I had no idea someone else had already decided what it was worth. My first wife, Margaret, died in 2019. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the morning, I sat beside a hospital bed in Lewisburg and watched her stop breathing. After that, I assumed the rest of my life would be quiet. I planned to sit on that porch, watch the pasture change color through the seasons, and wait for whatever came next with some measure of patience and a little peace. Then I went to a county fair in Bedford. She was at a folding table near the entrance, selling preserves she had made herself. Strawberry rhubarb in small glass jars with hand-labeled lids. She was laughing at something a woman beside her had said, and that laugh reached me before anything else did. Her name was Karen. She was widowed too. She had soft gray eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying mattered. I bought 4 jars of preserves and drove home with them on the passenger seat, thinking about her the whole way down Route 30, which scared me more than I was ready to admit. We had coffee twice, then dinner, then a long Sunday walk along the creek at the back of the property where the maples lean out over the water. She seemed genuinely moved by the land. She said it reminded her of her grandmother's farm in Ohio. I remember standing by the creek, listening to her, and thinking that maybe loneliness did not have to be the permanent condition of the rest of my life. I thought about my daughter, Rhonda, before I did anything else. Rhonda was 41 and worked as a litigator out of Harrisburg, mostly on agricultural law and estate disputes. She was the kind of woman who could sit through an entire uncomfortable conversation without giving a single thing away, then walk out and name every lie she had heard in the exact order she planned to prove them. She had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's patience and a sharpness that other lawyers seemed to recognize and step around carefully. She had also been through enough of her own difficulty. Her husband Craig was 38, a structural engineer, polite, and well-dressed, the kind of man who always called me sir and remembered to ask about the cattle. He helped carry feed bags when he came to the farm. He brought Rhonda flowers on her birthday. He seemed, in every practical sense, like a decent man. I thought so. I thought so for a long time. Then Karen's younger sister Sandra moved to Pennsylvania. Sandra was 44, quick with a compliment, laughed a little too easily at the right moments. She said she moved north because she missed her sister and wanted to be closer to family. She came to Sunday dinners and brought wine and said nice things about my cooking, even when it did not deserve them. Looking back now, I can trace every red flag to its exact moment. The way she asked about property lines a little too precisely for someone who was just curious. The way her eyes moved over the farm with a kind of patience that was different from Karen's genuine appreciation. More like a person measuring square footage than a woman admiring her brother-in-law's home. The way she asked twice who my lawyer was when I mentioned the prenuptial agreement Karen and I were drawing up before the wedding. I explained those things away. I told myself she was just detail-oriented. I told myself her questions were practical, and nothing more. I told myself I was being an old man who looked for trouble because he had already lost so much. Loneliness will do that to you. It can sand down your instincts until everything feels like an overreaction. It can take a warning and turn it into a misunderstanding with barely any effort at all. I signed the prenuptial agreement at my kitchen table with a black pen while the afternoon sun came through the back windows and fell across the pages. I remember thinking I was being careful. I had a daughter. I had land. I had a first wife I had buried. I was not the sort of man who ignored consequences. But I had not used Rhonda's firm. Karen had gently suggested we keep it simple and private. She said bringing my own daughter into the legal paperwork would make the marriage feel like a business negotiation before it even began. There was just enough truth in that to make it land. So I used a small Maryland attorney Sandra had recommended, a man who smiled too much, called the document Standard Protection for both sides, and sent me the final version on a Tuesday. I signed it on a Wednesday. For months afterward, that signature meant nothing unusual to me. Until the day on the porch changed everything. After Marisol pulled that clementine peel into her perfect spiral and went back inside, I stayed on that porch until the last light left the pasture and the bats came out over the silo. I was still, and I was quiet, and I did not move until the cold from the boards began to come up through my trousers and remind me I was not made of stone. That night I lay beside Karen and stared at the ceiling until 3 in the morning. I listened to her breathe with the easy rhythm of someone who believed tomorrow was safe. I thought about Marisol's voice, how flat and simple it had been, the way children speak, when they are describing something factual rather than something they understand is wrong. I thought about Craig. I thought about every time he had called me sir. Every bone in my body wanted to wake Karen and demand the truth in plain words. Every instinct pulled me toward confrontation the way a pulled thread pulls at the hem of a good coat. But I am a patient man, or I have tried to become one, and I knew something that angry men sometimes forget. When you accuse someone before you have proof they cannot explain away, you hand them time. Time to delete, time to rehearse, time to get ahead of you. So instead of waking Karen, I made a plan. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, I was in my truck at the far end of the property near the creek, engine idling, phone in my hand. I called Rhonda. I need to tell you something, I said, and I need you to hear it before you react. Her voice changed before I finished the sentence. Daddy, what happened? It was not a question. It was the sound of a woman who had already been waiting for something she did not want to be true. I told her what Marisol had said. Long silence, the kind where you can feel a person deciding how much to tell you. Then Rhonda said, I know, Daddy. I have been watching him for 4 months. I will be honest, part of me was relieved she already knew. Part of me was destroyed that she had been carrying it alone. Part of me was proud of her in a way I did not have the right language for, because watching something fall apart while you quietly build a case takes a kind of discipline that most people do not possess. She drove up that afternoon and parked by the equipment shed, away from the house, away from the windows. She climbed into my truck with a folder balanced on her knee and sat very straight with her hands in her lap, and then she told me what she had found. It had started with small things. Craig's phone always faced down on the counter. Showers immediately after coming home, before he had even said hello. A second laugh she heard in his voice when he stepped outside to take calls in the yard. Gas disappearing from his car, faster than the commute explained. She had told herself sensible things. She had tried to be a reasonable woman who did not invent problems. But Rhonda was built differently from most people. She had left herself logged into an iPad she had stopped using and he had apparently forgotten about. She found the email account there, sitting open, and what she read did not only break her heart. It restructured every assumption she had made about the last 2 years of her life. The affair was real. That part landed the way it always does, like a door someone kicks in at midnight. But the affair was only the top layer of a much deeper plan. The messages between Craig and Sandra went back past hotels, past secret afternoons, past the kind of mutual betrayal that wrecks a marriage. They went back to before Karen ever stood behind a folding table at the Bedford Fair. Rhonda looked at me from across the truck cab and said 4 words that took away the last warmth in my chest. "Daddy, this was planned." Sandra had not moved to Pennsylvania because she missed her sister. She had moved because of me. More precisely, because of my land. My farm was not valuable in the way that makes people photograph it for magazines. It was not dramatic or beautiful or unusual. It was working land. Functional and plain, but it was 460 acres, and the back 90 were something else entirely. Hardwood timber, clean creek access, a gentle grade, and a county road close enough that a developer could practically see his investment from the highway. A development company out of New Jersey had first come to my door 3 years before the Bedford Fair. They wanted the back 90. The first offer was $1.7 million. I told them no. The second offer was $2.1 million. Still no. The last offer they put in writing was $2.4 million. I turned every one of them down. I told the last man who came to my door that the land had never been for sale and never would be. He smiled in a way that told me he had heard that before, from men who eventually changed their minds. Sandra had heard those numbers before I ever met Karen. How exactly she had found them, we do not know entirely. But the development company was not discreet. And rural counties talk. Someone had mentioned my name. Someone had mentioned the number. And Sandra, who had a talent for seeing opportunity where other people saw sentiment, had made a calculation. An old man, recently widowed, a valuable piece of land and no wife to protect him. No son, a daughter in a different city. She told Craig before Karen ever walked up to a county fair. The prenuptial agreement was not Karen's idea. Not entirely. It had been suggested to Karen by Sandra, framed as responsible protection for both sides. The Maryland attorney was Sandra's recommendation, and buried inside that document, in language that looked like standard boilerplate, unless you were a trained estate attorney reading with both eyes open, was a clause that had been built for one purpose. If I signed a commercial development contract on my land during the marriage and then died, Karen could claim 49% of the proceeds from the developed property, regardless of what my will said. Rhonda read it to me from the folder in her lap, and I felt the truck cab get smaller as she spoke. My signature was at the bottom of that page. I had signed it without understanding it, because I had trusted the wrong people. and because loneliness had sanded down my instincts, and because I had wanted to believe that a woman laughing at a county fair was just a woman laughing at a county fair. The plan, as Rhonda laid it out for me piece by piece, was methodical. Sandra would introduce Karen to me. Karen, who genuinely liked me and may not have understood the full depth of what her sister had designed, would marry me. Craig, who knew development engineering and land access and what the back 90 was worth, would eventually help push me toward agreeing to a development deal. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not even in the first few years. They were patient people. And if I refused to sell while I was alive, the clause still held. Karen was younger. They expected her to outlive me. After I was gone, Karen would claim her share. Craig would leave my daughter. Sandra would collect through both of them. It was not a love story. It was an inheritance scheme. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel. These hands had set fence posts in frozen ground. They had delivered calves on January mornings when the temperature was below zero, and the water trough was sheeted with ice. They had signed a mortgage, built a barn extension, and held my first wife's hand while she stopped breathing in a room that smelled like disinfectant and grief. And somehow these same hands had signed a trap. I did not cry that afternoon. I wanted to. There was something pressing up behind my eyes that I could not allow, not yet, because if I started, I was not sure I would stop. Rhonda reached across the truck and put her hand over mine. Then she said the hardest words she could have chosen. "Daddy, I need you to go back inside and act like nothing has changed." For 6 weeks, I had to do the thing that went against every instinct I possessed. I had to be normal. I had to sit at my own kitchen table while Karen poured my coffee and passed me the cream the way she always did. I had to let Sandra through my front door on Sundays with a bottle of wine and that careful little laugh. I had to watch her compliment the soup, touch the back of Karen's chair, move through my home like someone who believed she had already won. And when Craig came for dinner, I shook his hand. "Good to see you, sir," he said every single time, like he had learned it and repeated it and never once meant it. "Good to see you too, Craig," I said. My voice did not crack. My hand did not shake. I found that terrifying, in a way, because it suggested that I had been performing normalcy around dishonest people for so long that I had become good at it. Every dinner felt like sitting at a table with an unloaded gun someone believed was loaded. I played the part. I left old development maps on the kitchen counter, face up where Karen or Sandra might notice. I let myself linger over them when either one walked past. I made passing comments about how tired the back fields were getting, how hard it was to keep the timber properly managed at my age. I was not going to sell my land. I was going to let them believe I might. Because Rhonda needed one more thing. She needed Craig to move first, to file for divorce, to tell his version of events on record before she showed him what she had. Once he committed to his story in court documents, every email and recording and transfer would prove he had walked in lying. The recording came from a parking lot outside a Sheetz on Mill Road on a rainy Thursday morning. Rhonda's investigator sat 2 rows back in a gray Subaru with a cracked taillight. The audio was not clean, but Lainey's voice was clear enough when she said that once Otis signed the development option, Karen's claim survived no matter what his daughter tried to do about it. One sentence, spoken casually, the way people speak when they believe they are alone. That sentence, attached to a date, attached to email records, attached to financial transfers, Rhonda had traced through Craig's business account, became the first brick in a wall. The second piece came from my granddaughter. On a Saturday morning in Rhonda's kitchen, while pancakes were on the stove and the windows were fogged with steam, Marisol stood in her socked feet by the counter and told her mother what she had told me on the porch. She said, She saw her daddy kissing Aunt Sandra in Grandpa's barn. Then she looked down at her socks and said, "Was I not supposed to say that?" Rhonda set the spatula down and turned off the stove. She sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table and asked, in the gentlest voice she could manage, if Marisol was sure about what she had seen. Marisol said yes. Rhonda told me later that she cried. Real tears, even though she had known for months, even though she had already built the case. Because there is a difference between knowing something and hearing it come out of your child's mouth on a Saturday morning when there should have been nothing in the room but the smell of butter and maple syrup. She dried her eyes before Craig came home. She let him believe she had found out the way he expected her to, that she had stumbled into the truth through Marisol, that she was hurt and raw and focused only on the affair. She did not mention land. She did not mention prenuptial clauses or Maryland attorneys or parking lot recordings. She only said she wanted him to file first. Keep it clean, no court battles. Craig looked at his wife, the woman he had been deceiving for over a year, the woman who had spent 4 months quietly building a case that would dismantle everything he thought he was escaping into, and he calculated that cooperating was his safest exit. On Monday morning, he filed for divorce. By Tuesday afternoon, Rhonda's counterclaim was in the system. Attached to it were 3 months of emails, 2 financial records, 1 parking lot recording, and a highlighted clause from a prenuptial agreement that had been designed to survive my death. He had walked directly into the thing she had been waiting for him to do. While Rhonda's counterclaim was hitting Craig's attorney's desk, I was preparing my own legal response with her firm's help. The claim in my name was filed against both Karen and Sandra. It named conspiracy to commit fraud. It named the prenuptial agreement as the instrument of that fraud. It asked a court to find that I had signed it under false pretenses and to void the clause entirely. Every document was attached, the emails, the dates, the transfers, the recording, the Maryland attorney's connection to Sandra. Rhonda had spent 4 months building a quiet case, and I had spent 6 weeks pretending to be a trusting old man, and now all of it was going to arrive at the same time. On a Friday evening, I asked Karen to host a small family dinner. Just us, I told her, nothing fancy. Karen smiled and said, of course. I told her I had been thinking more about the development offer on the back 90. I mentioned it casually, standing in the kitchen doorway, like it was a thought that had simply arrived and not a line I had rehearsed. She told Sandra. I had known she would. On Friday evening, Karen brought out her mother's china, the set she usually saved for Christmas. She made beef and barley soup and warm bread from the bakery in Lewisburg and lit a candle in the center of the table. Sandra arrived early with a bottle of red wine and a lightness about her I had not seen in months. They were celebrating. I sat at the head of my table, unfolded my napkin, and asked Sandra how her drive had been. At precisely halfway through the meal, the doorbell rang. Karen went to the door. When she came back, she was holding a large envelope with the careful expression of someone who does not yet know what they are holding, but already suspects it is not a gift. There is a man at the door, she said slowly. He says I have to sign for this. I kept the spoon in my hand. Then sign for it, sweetheart. She signed. The man left. Karen stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room and opened the envelope, and I watched her eyes cross the first page with the careful focus of someone who had once trusted everything and was now looking at proof that that trust had been used. The color left her face. Sandra said, Karen, what is it? I set my spoon down. It is a lawsuit, I said, from me, against both of you. The room held. I had imagined this moment perhaps 200 times over 6 weeks. I had pictured raising my voice. I had imagined saying things about my father and Margaret, and the land and what it meant to me. I had even, in a particularly bitter moment before sleep one night, imagined flipping the table. I am not proud of that. But when the moment arrived, I found I did not want to perform. I looked at Karen, the woman I had married, the woman who had woken beside me in my own bed, the woman whose presence I had believed was a second chance. "I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning," I said. "Your things will be packed. You will not come back onto this property without my attorney present." Karen's mouth opened. "The prenuptial agreement is being challenged. You will not receive my land. You will not receive proceeds from any development deal. And you will not stand in my kitchen pretending you were ever safe here." Then I turned to Sandra. "I have known for 6 weeks," I said. Sandra pushed back from the table so fast, her chair scraped against the floor. "You cannot prove anything," she said, and I recognized that sound. It was not defiance. It was fear wearing defiance's clothes. "October 7th, I said. "October 14th, October 22nd. Her face changed. "Those are the dates you contacted Craig about the development plan. My daughter has the emails. Her firm has them. My attorney has them. I let that sit. We also have the parking lot recording from the sheets on Mill Road. We have the financial transfers from Craig's business account. We have the connection between the Maryland attorney and your name." Sandra looked at her sister. Karen was looking at me. "By Monday morning," I said, "the district attorney's office will have everything." Karen sat back down as if someone had removed the bones from her legs. For the first time all evening, she did not look to her sister for direction. She looked at me. "Otis," she said. Her voice had gone quiet and small. "I did not know about the land, I promise you. I did not know about the clause. Here is the part I have turned over the most in the months that followed." I believed her. Not entirely. Not enough to change what had to happen. But enough to understand that Karen and Sandra had not been doing the same thing. Karen had wanted security. She had wanted someone steady and kind. She had allowed herself to be steered by a sister she trusted, and had not asked the questions she should have asked because asking them would have required her to suspect someone she loved. That is not the same as planning. But it is also not innocence. "I am sorry your sister used you," I said. "But you still let yourself become the door she walked through." Tears moved down her face. I did not reach across the table. "You can keep the car," I said. "Everything else goes through my lawyer." Because pity and love are real. And neither of them is a reason to let someone strip what you built from the people you were supposed to protect. Karen was gone by 11 that night. She did not wait until morning. She moved through the front hall quietly, the way people move in houses where they understand they no longer belong. She carried her bags herself. I heard the trunk close from the porch where I was sitting in the dark. She paused at the front door for a moment, just inside the threshold. "I am sorry, Otis," she said. I nodded. I had no answer left in me that would have helped either of us. She walked down the porch steps and across the gravel to the car. I sat and watched the headlights come on and sweep across the barn, and then I watched her taillights pass the Henderson silo and turn and disappear. That was how my second marriage ended. Not with screaming. With red lights fading into a dark road and the quiet that comes after. The legal proceedings moved through winter and into spring, and what emerged from them was not dramatic in the way revenge stories sometimes are. There were no spectacular courtroom moments. There were filings, hearings, depositions, and the slow accumulation of documented truth. Craig did not fight the way he might have if he had known what Rhonda was holding before he filed. He had believed, until he received her counterclaim, that he was walking away from an ordinary broken marriage. The counterclaim, with its attached emails and recordings and financial records, showed him how entirely he had misread the situation. His attorney advised him to settle. He did. Rhonda kept the house, the vehicles, the pension accounts, and full custody of the children. Craig received scheduled visitation and a legal record that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. His firm placed him on administrative leave within 3 weeks. By early summer, after his name appeared in the civil fraud filing connected to my case, the firm let him go. He tried for a while to tell people it had been an ugly divorce. But Rhonda's filings made that characterization impossible to maintain. The truth was already documented, and the documents were accessible. Sandra was arrested on a Thursday morning in late February. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud and related offenses. She hired a criminal defense attorney in Pittsburgh and gave interviews to no one. For a period of time, she tried to tell relatives that she had been misrepresented, that the emails were taken out of context, that Rhonda had weaponized her law degree against a family. But screenshots travel faster than explanations, and once people saw the dates and the language, and the way Sandra had discussed my farm before Karen ever spoke to me at a county fair, the relatives who had been quietly neutral stopped being quiet. Karen stopped answering Sandra's calls. 2 cousins removed her from group messages. A woman from Karen's church returned a dish with a folded note inside asking her not to come by again. By summer's end, Sandra had left Bedford with 2 suitcases, and no one standing beside her. Karen settled the civil case without going to court. She retained a small amount of personal savings, her car, and a few household items that had belonged to her mother. The prenuptial agreement was formally rescinded in February, the clause declared void on grounds of fraudulent inducement. She received nothing from the farm and nothing from the land. She moved into a small apartment above a hair salon on the eastern edge of town. I know this because the settlement paperwork listed an address, not because I was keeping track of her. I do not hate Karen. I do not think about her very often. I think about what she represented, the version of the future I had believed in when I drove home from the fair with 4 jars of preserves on the passenger seat. But that is not the same as thinking about her. Marisol is 11 now. She comes to the farm on weekends, the same as always. She sits on the back porch with her legs hanging off the edge, and she still peels clementines the way I taught her, pulling the rind into one long continuous spiral. She does not ask many questions about what happened. I do not volunteer more than she seeks. But there have been moments in quiet conversation, out near the creek or on the porch, as the afternoon light falls across the hills, when she has looked at me with the kind of direct attention that her mother also has. And I have understood that she is waiting to know, in whatever language suits her age, that what she said mattered. It mattered completely. What she saw in that barn, and her willingness to walk up to her grandfather and say it plainly, is the reason my daughter has her children and her independence. It is the reason the back 90 acres are not subdivided and sold. It is the reason this farm still carries my father's name. If she ever asks me directly, I will tell her the truth in words she can carry. I will say, "You saw something wrong and you told someone safe." That is what honesty looks like when it is real. Most adults struggle with it their whole lives. The back 90 did not go to a developer. After everything, some of my neighbors assumed I would take the highest offer, clear the hardwood, and let someone else turn those slopes into something profitable. I thought about it. $2.4 million has a weight to it that does not disappear just because you turn it down a second time. But every time I pictured heavy equipment coming down through that tree line, I saw Margaret walking beside the creek with her coat pulled close and one hand tucked into the pocket of my jacket because she had forgotten her gloves again. I heard her laughing at the dog shaking water across her boots. Those trees have been standing longer than any offer I have received. So I sold the land to a state conservation trust for considerably less than the developer's last number. They paid fairly for what it was, and they made a binding promise. The land stays whole, no subdivision, no private structures, public access for hiking, and trout fishing along the creek. Managed timber that cannot be clear-cut. Just land, doing what land does when you let it. There is a small wooden sign at the trailhead. It will carry Margaret's name by my request. I chose the location myself, at the bend in the creek where the water runs slow over smooth stones before turning under the shade of the old maples. We used to walk there on Sunday afternoons in the years before the children were born, before the mortgage was paid, before the hard seasons that taught us what we were made of. The dog would splash ahead, and she would laugh, and I would think quietly that whatever else life contained, this was enough. That is the place I wanted to give to strangers. Not the barn where the scheme unfolded, not the kitchen table where I signed a document I had not read carefully enough. The place where love had been simple and real. I spent a long time, after the legal matters closed, sitting with my own share of the blame. Sandra and Craig had built the scheme. That was their choice and their character. But I had missed things I should not have missed. Sandra had asked too many questions, too precisely. The Maryland attorney had been too easy, too fast, too agreeable. Karen had deflected every time I had tried to bring Rhonda into the legal process. I had explained every one of those things away because I had wanted to. Loneliness is not a character flaw, but it can become a vulnerability when you let it do your thinking for you. I had been so grateful for the warmth at the county fair that I had not asked why a stranger was warm. I had been so relieved to believe the rest of my life might not be silent that I had stopped asking whether the sound I was hearing was genuine. That is a hard accounting to complete, but it is honest. I do not tell that part of the story to punish myself. I tell it because it is true, and because the people who might need to hear it most are the ones in the middle of the same kind of hope I had. Looking at a folding table at a county fair and thinking that maybe this is the thing that finally fills the quiet. Hope is not wrong, but love that is real does not require you to silence your instincts to keep it. If someone makes you feel that asking questions is a kind of disloyalty, that paying attention is a kind of insult, that bringing your people into important decisions will spoil the beauty of the moment, those are not signs of a clean heart. Those are the signs of someone who needs not to look too closely. The farm is quiet now in the way I used to want my life to be.
Rhonda visits every other weekend with the children. Marisol has claimed the porch as hers in the way that children claim spaces with blankets and paperback books and a specific corner where she prefers to sit. Her younger brother, who is 7, has decided that feeding the cattle is the greatest responsibility a person can hold, and he approaches it with the kind of gravity that makes me proud every time.
Rhonda and I do not talk much about the case when the children are around, but sometimes in the evening after they are asleep and the farm is quiet, we will sit together on the porch and look at the pasture in the dark and not say anything at all, which is its own kind of conversation between a father and a daughter who have been through something together. She saved me. I want that to be said plainly and completely. Not the lawsuit, not the documents, not the recordings, or the dates, or the counterclaim. Rhonda herself saved me. She watched her own marriage fall apart, gathered the evidence while it was happening, protected her children through all of it, and still had enough left over to reach back and protect her father. That is not a small thing. I think about what she could have done differently. She could have confronted Craig the moment she opened that iPad. She could have called me in anger. She could have filed immediately and exposed everything at the first possible moment. Instead, she did the harder thing. She stayed quiet, stayed strategic, and stayed patient until the case was built well enough to hold. The instinct toward confrontation is understandable. It is human. When you discover you have been betrayed, every part of you wants to name it loudly and immediately, because silence feels like complicity and anger feels like dignity. But there is a different kind of dignity. It is the kind that watches carefully, says nothing until the time is right, and then opens a folder in a courtroom and lets the documented truth do what shouting never could. That is the kind of dignity my daughter has. She got it from her mother, I think. And my granddaughter, who sat on a porch with clementine-stained fingers and told the truth as simply as she would have said it might rain tomorrow, was born with it already. I am 68 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that the people who save you are rarely the ones holding weapons or making speeches. They are usually the ones in socked feet asking a quiet question at the kitchen counter, or the one in the truck beside you with a folder on her knee and a plan she has already made. I think about what I would tell a man who is where I was before that county fair, widowed, tired, grateful for any warmth that leans his direction. I would not tell him to close off. I would not tell him that loneliness makes you foolish, because that would be unkind and not entirely true. I would tell him this: pay attention even when paying attention feels ungrateful. Let the people who love you be part of the things that matter. And if something inside you keeps asking a question you keep pushing away, perhaps that question deserves an honest answer. Because the truth does not always arrive with screaming and drama and a barn door moment. Sometimes it arrives the way my granddaughter delivered it, quietly, calmly, while she was peeling a clementine on the back porch, not even fully understanding what she had placed in my hands. The truth she handed me that afternoon was the beginning of everything. And the land where Margaret's name now stands at the edge of the creek, where strangers can walk and fish and stand under the old maples in October light, is the ending that was worth the wait. If this story stayed with you, I would like to hear from you in the comments. Would you have walked straight into that barn? Or would you have done what my daughter did? Stayed quiet, gathered proof, and waited until the trap was closed? Have you ever had to hold a painful truth in silence while you built something stronger? Tell me below. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, loyalty, the people who save us when we cannot save ourselves, and the kind of justice that arrives not with anger but with patience and a folder of documents.